Modern gaming is trash. That's basically the general consensus in every single video that I watch on the subject on this platform. And there are a lot of videos on this subject on this platform. I took it upon myself the other day to watch a fair few of these. And when I say a fair few, I watched one just because it was recommended to me, and then I typed in modern gaming, and I ended up watching about 20. That's no exaggeration, because I was fully expecting to see people have difference of opinions, and it wasn't really that way at all. Most people thought the 9th generation of consoles, which is of course the PS5 and the Series X, were generally bad and more or less pointless, and I don't necessarily agree or disagree with that. In fact, in this video you'll see that I firmly have that fence wedged between my cheeks. I don't know which side of it to stand on, and that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. More of a casual conversation than the normal sort of video mode edit crazy videos that I tend to do, and if you are a regular around here you'll know that I don't really play many modern games. In fact, I love the Xbox 360, as you can maybe tell, and I do have a fair few Mega Drive games. It's not to say that I don't have a PS5 and I don't have PS5 games or PS4 games, because I do. Okay, not many, and I don't play many. In fact, I could probably count on one hand the amount of PlayStation 5 games I've played and completed. Mortal Kombat 11 and Sifu, and to be quite honest, those are the only two games I can think of on the PS5 that I've actually played to completion. I have played more modern games on the Switch, but we're not really here to talk about the Switch in any real capacity, although I may touch upon it later on. But for me, and I've said this not necessarily from the very beginning, but I've said it for a while, the 9th generation of consoles is a stopgap. They needed to release something. The PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One had been out a long time. The hardware had fallen way behind that of a modern day PC, and they needed a refresh. But rather than bringing out another PlayStation 4 Pro console, and the equivalent that of the Xbox of course, because they did have a One X, they decided to go with a whole new console generation. And there's no denying that the power in these new consoles is immense. Unfortunately, they're not really harnessing that power because they're still pandering to the 8th generation. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I won't go into all of them because, to be quite honest, I don't know all of them. But the one big problem that happened, of course, at the very beginning of the 9th generation, we had a global pandemic. That slowed down production of consoles, and in turn, people had to stick with the 8th generation. And I think FOMO was a thing until it wasn't. And then people were like, you know what, I'm happy to stay with the 8th generation because we're still getting games for it. You look back at any console generation in history and they stop supporting the older generation very quickly after the new one comes out. Maybe 6 months, 12 months at the absolute maximum, and you only ever really get these sort of sports titles that come out that go between the two. So FIFA as a prime example are probably the ones that sort of support the older consoles the longest. Everyone else ditches it as soon as they're financially able to. But in this generation, it's taken almost 4 years for developers to come out and say, we're not actually going to be releasing games on the older generation anymore, we're just going to focus on this current one. 4 years is a long time. That is basically half of the current generation's life cycle, because we kind of have a roadmap for this. And of course, we've already heard Microsoft talking about the next generation of console and how it will be the biggest technological leap we've ever seen in a console generation. I don't actually believe that, but I'm more than happy to eat my words, and I really hope I do, but I just can't see that they can bring out a console generation that has a bigger gap than that of the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3, or more specifically for me personally anyway, the Xbox 360. That had my jaw on the floor. It was crazy, the difference between graphics, gameplay, storytelling and all the rest of it. The jump from the 360 to the Xbox One had me gasping a little bit as well. If you've never played Rise Son of Rome, that game is beautiful, and we never had anything that looked quite that good on the 360. It was a big jump. Fast forward 10 years, and we don't really have much difference between Rise Son of Rome and whatever game you insert here from the PlayStation 5. Don't get me wrong, the majority of AAA PlayStation 5 games that come out look very, very good. They look spectacular. But Rise Son of Rome looks very, very good. It looks spectacular. Yes, we have better visuals on a PS5, but it's not anywhere near that jump that you would expect in a 10-year gap. And when I talk modern gaming, and I don't know how everyone else does it really, but I am talking PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 in the same breath. Both the Series X and the PS5 are backward compatible with that of the 8th generation, and all the games kind of blend in when it comes comes to the Xbox anyway, with their cases, but not only that, with their graphics as well. And because we've had dual releases on both platforms for the longest time, well, literally since launch, it is quite difficult sometimes to differentiate between the two. The biggest problem that I see in these videos is the installation times, the updates, and the storage space required for these modern titles. And I do agree when it comes to the storage. When it comes to the installation and the downloading of the updates, it is a pain in the arse. There is absolutely no denying it. Some games are 30 gig installations. Others are 130 gig installations, and it's going up and up. Who knows the size of GTA 6? I mean, that game is probably going to be half of your hard drive. And when you finally get to a point where you're able to click play, most of the time you are required to download an update. Even on day one, some of these games have updates, and some of the updates are bigger than the games themselves, which I find remarkable. And that is annoying. But that is the trade-off between a modern console and something like an Xbox 360, where installing a game was an optional extra that I do partake in because I like them to run smoother and quieter, because the disc barely spins after you've installed the game. My biggest gripe is the storage space. These consoles that come out, PlayStation 5, Series X, they have a maximum storage space of 1 terabyte. That, back in 2005, would have been a massive amount of memory. The Xbox 360 launched with 20 gig. They had a non-hard drive version which have a 512 megabyte memory card, for crying out loud. These days, 1 terabyte is nothing. It can probably hold between 5 and 10 games if you're lucky. And for those with time constraints, it is a massive pain in the ass, because it means having to delete games, re-download them, reinstall them, and all the rest of it. And that takes time. And people of the older generation, I'm not necessarily excluding the younger generation either, because they do have time constraints, but older generation where they have kids, pets, wives, you name it, we all have responsibilities. We don't have from Friday afternoon after we finish school till Sunday evening before school to play these games. We have very small windows, and when those windows are eaten into by installation and downloads, that's where problems are magnified, and that's where people's frustrations come in. The Mega Drive, for example, doesn't have that. I put the cartridge in, I press play, and then literally the second I press play, I'm in the game. There's no load times there. It's instant, and that's what people miss. But the trade-off, of course, is the graphics between a Mega Drive and a PlayStation 5 is just a little bit different. The other thing, of course, is where are the games? Insert John Travolta meme here. Because there aren't that many of them on this generation of console. I typed in how many games are on the PlayStation 5, and I was surprised to see that there are 2,500 games. But of course, the majority of those are going to be sort of arcadey, indie games released non-physical, digital only on the storefront. And whereas a lot of them can be very, very good, we're missing big AAA hitting games. We had a lot of them on the PS4, the Xbox One. We had even more of them on the 360 and the PS3. That, to me, is the golden generation. You will never see anything like that ever again. Week after week, we had AAA game after AAA game, and they were all bangers. Okay, don't get me wrong, I say all. There were a fair few stinkers, of course, but I bet you there's a 90% chance that whatever game I grab off that 360 shelf behind me will be a bit of a banger. And I'm going to do it without looking in one take. I've got no idea what I'm about to grab. I think it's a tin, actually, which means it's going to be Lost Planet. It's not Lost Planet, it's BioShock. Tell me that isn't a banger. But it used to happen week on week. I worked in Game Station, and the amount of new releases you'd have coming in, half the time I didn't even know what they were. There were so many to keep track of, I couldn't keep track of them. I only knew what they were when they came in and I read the back of the box. Another issue that I see with modern gaming from these videos is skill-based matchmaking. Now, this isn't something that's talked about a lot, to be fair. It was maybe only in 1 or 2 of the 20-something videos that I ended up watching, but it is absolutely true. Skill-based matchmaking ruined online gaming for me, to the point where I don't like playing games online anymore. I get far more enjoyment from a single player experience. So for those of you who are a little bit unfamiliar with skill-based matchmaking, essentially these days, to make it fair, they pair you with players who have a very similar skill level. And whereas I do understand the sentiment there, and many would argue that that is fair, it does often lead, and I say often, 99% of the time, it will lead to a very frustrating, unrewarding experience. experience. You will finish with 20 kills, but you'll finish with like 18, 19 deaths or maybe more, because everyone you're playing is on the exact same skill level as you. Whereas back in the day, Call of Duty 2, Call of Duty 3 on the 360, there was none of that. You just get chucked into a random lobby. There could be people who were worse than you, there could be people that were better than you or at the same level. But you'd have a much more fun experience more often than not. If you were a very good player, then of course every single game you were crapping over everyone and you'd feel really good about yourself. And of course the people who were getting shot 20 times in a match were not really enjoying it that often, but then they'd go into another game, they'd leave the lobby, they'd find another one that was much more on their level or that they were better at, if you will, and again they'd have an enjoyable experience. These days everyone is exactly the same, and when it comes to playing something like EAFC for example, the amount of concentration you have to put into playing an online game is crazy. You'll often see content creators complain that there's no fun game mode anymore, and the reason for that isn't because they're playing Weekend League or Rivals or Friendlies or whatever, it's because of skill-based matchmaking. You're coming up against people who are on the same level as you, meaning you have to concentrate for the full game. One mistake means they're going to score. If they don't make a mistake, they've beaten you. In the old days, you used to go into tournaments or whatever, and you'd get thrown up against random people. They could be better than you, they could be worse than you, they could be the same. Who knows? It's a lottery. And if you were average or above average, it meant that more often than not, you will probably have a good game, and that made you want to go back and play more. Not necessarily fair for those who aren't particularly very good at video games, but that for me personally, it kind of ruined it when they brought that sort of skill-based stuff in. I don't really have fun playing online games anymore. Going in and killing 10 people and dying 11 times, what's the point? I may as well have not played. Microtransactions, I mean, we could probably stand here and talk about this for hours. I'm not going to, because for me personally, like I said, I don't really play online that much anymore. If you do play online, microtransactions are going to be thrown in your face all the time. I don't have a problem with them so long as they don't affect the gameplay. They don't give someone an advantage in the game. I don't understand how that is a thing and how it hasn't been banned yet. FIFA, again, to name a game, or EAFC these days, should have been banned, or at least sort of looked at, as it was looked at, and they let it go. And using surprise mechanics isn't a mask for gambling, and that's exactly what it is. You open packs. You are gambling with real money.
Alright, I have loaded up $1,000 worth of FC points. I don't know why. I hate myself.
To open packs to potentially get players that are better than your opponents. I mean, spoiler alert, it's still skill-based matchmaking, so you are going to be playing against people who are the same quality as you are, regardless of what players you have, although you can sort of out-team other people, which is where the unfairness of it comes in. Yes, we have skill-based matchmaking, but this guy could have a 99 rated everyone, and I don't spend any money on the game, and my players are 80 rated. Does it make a difference? Unfortunately, yes, it does. They are buying an advantage, and I know this may sound alien to a lot of people, but there are a lot of players out there who will spend money on a game that they've just bought for 70 quid. I used to work with someone who would drop, and this is no word of a lie, he would drop £70 every Friday on packs. How many packs does that get you? Not that many. Are you guaranteed to get a good player? No, not at all. I was guilty of it myself back in the day. In fact, at launch, back in like FIFA 15 and 16, I used to drop £300 to £400 on packs, and it was mainly for content. But to be fair, if I wasn't filming content, I still probably would have dropped a couple of £100 because I did enjoy it for the 20 minutes that it lasts, and then once it's done and dusted and you actually look at your team and you think, if I had another 50 quid I might be able to afford that one player that I want. It was very unsatisfying after you finished, but for some reason it made you want to go and do it again, because this time it'll be different, and that's gambling. So even though that is a problem in modern gaming, absolutely, I just don't see it anymore. I don't look at it, I don't think about it. Falling out of love with gaming is definitely a thing, and a lot of people will associate that with burnout. You've played games for so many years, of course at some point you're going to get bored of it. It can be the same with anything, and I would definitely say that I've been through that in my life where I had burnout. I played too many games and then I sort of lost interest in playing them all together, but now I'm fully through that. I don't know what clicked and what's changed, but now all I want to do is play video games. I keep thinking, well, what am I going to play later? What game can I pick up next? And that's kind of made me want to buy into more modern games to see what I've been missing out on. And of course they do come with their problems of installing and blah blah blah, but I am quite excited to get my teeth into the library that I've missed out on and some of the newer games that are coming out. I genuinely can't remember the last time I bought a new release. So there are going to be some people, of course, who say that they prefer the older stuff because they are burnt out with video games and they don't have any interest in the new stuff coming out because they don't really have an interest in playing games altogether. They'll look back at the older stuff and maybe have a bash of 20 minutes on a Mega Drive because they're fueled by nostalgia. The games are still good, sure, but it's nostalgia that drives them to want to play them. Now, I might be the wrong person to talk about this subject because I don't have much of any experience playing Xbox One or PS4 games in general. As I mentioned, I was a FIFA content creator, so I used to play that all the time. And the last thing I wanted to do after I finished playing it was go and play a different game. I'd want to get away from gaming as much as I could and go and watch some TV or go and watch a film in the cinema or something. Just go out and just get away from it. So I wouldn't say I completely skipped the 8th generation, but I played very few games. Rise Son of Rome I played on launch, completed it, loved it, and there are quite a few others dotted around there that I did play that I just had to play because I really liked the look of them, for example, but I missed a lot. And when it comes to the current, the 9th generation, I've missed a lot. There aren't that many games on it, to be fair, but I have missed the majority of them. I've not played a God of War. I've not played any of the Spider-Mans, for example. I don't like Final Fantasy, but I'd be up for giving it a go at some point. And it's the same with a lot of the other games that have come out. I've not played Ronin, for example, and I'd like to give that a go. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. In an upcoming video, I will talk about sort of more modern gaming and me picking up a modern console, because as I've mentioned a lot, I've wanted a Series X. That time is nigh. We are upon that sort of time in the series, and again, I'll mention that in a series video coming not that far away. Maybe my opinion on modern gaming will change, but at the moment, I do feel like the 9th generation is a stopgap. It's a more or less anyway a waste of time. It won't be remembered for anything other than the generation that was gameless, and I'm really hoping that the 10th generation, PS6, Xbox, whatever, will blow us all away. Consoles will come out with 10 terabytes of storage, discs won't require us to download the games, the updates are few and far between, and we all get that sort of old gaming experience on the new hardware, new graphics, new storytelling, and everything else that is good about modern gaming that comes along with it. Sony and Microsoft could learn an awful lot from Nintendo. They do a tremendous amount with terrible hardware. Nowadays anyway, it's the equivalent to a 30-year-old Casio calculator. I could probably run most Switch games on my Breville toaster, and yet they look fantastic for what they are. They play really well. There's no installing, it's all on the cartridge for the most part. Any update that I might have to do before I play the game is minimal. It takes seconds to download. It's like a little patch rather than a game-breaking change. And their first-party titles might not be for everyone, but the game library on the Nintendo Switch means that there has to be something for everyone there somewhere. I wouldn't necessarily suggest playing third-party games like any of the wrestling games or even Red Dead, for example, because the poor little Switch can't quite handle the frame rates, but anything that was built specifically for it, any first-party titles as I mentioned or any indie games, they can run quite well and they look great and they play great. It's not only one of the best modern systems, it's probably one of the best systems of all time, and many people throw that title around, but to be quite honest, it's true. I'm guilty of neglecting my Switch a fair bit, and I will revisit the console at a later date, and I would like to collect for it again because there are so many games there that I'd like to play, and I'll talk about that in another video. But if you've never considered a Switch before, just look into it a little bit more. Honestly, you can't go far wrong with it, especially if you're struggling with the 9th generation. I could stand here for another 40 minutes talking about this, and in my very first take, which I completely edited and then decided I didn't like it, the video was 30 minutes long, and it was me bashing the 9th generation until I watched it back and thought, I don't actually believe what I'm saying here. It's not the best generation we've ever had. It could potentially be the worst. But with that being said, it does kind of make me appreciate what we've had in the past just that little bit more. Just the little things like being able to pop the disc in and press play without having to wait for 3 hours for the game to install and download. The library of games we have on other consoles, the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, the PS2 and the PS1, they have the biggest libraries we've ever seen, and there's so many good games there. It just makes you appreciate it all that much more. And going back and playing it now, there are going to be games that you definitely had those nostalgia goggles on for, but a lot of them do hold up and you can absolutely have fun playing older games. And I do. I have more fun playing on my 360 than I ever have done on a PS5. That's not to say that I'm not going to give this generation a chance, and when I say this generation I also include the 8th generation, because very soon I will start collecting for it quite heavily, and I will give a lot of these games a good go, and maybe we revisit this at a later date. But I just hope that now in the back end, or the second half I should say, of the 9th generation, we can leave the 8th generation behind, really kick on and release those games. My concerns are that they just pump so much money into making these that they take so long to come out. By the time they actually do, we've lost interest, and they're not as good as they kind of need to be for as long as it took for them to come out, and the budgets that they have. They need to take notes out of Nintendo's book, but also indie developers as well. Some of these games are fantastic, and they're made by studios of less than 10 people. Not every game has to be a AAA banger that you spent $500 million on. Let me know what you think of modern gaming in the comments section. Are you going to abandon it and maybe revisit some of the older stuff, or are you more of a modern gamer now anyway, and you don't really understand how people can go back to playing the older stuff, having seen the visuals on a PlayStation 5, for example? I did say at the beginning that I was wedged firmly on that fence, and even though I do kind of stand by that, I understand both sides of it. But as I mentioned, when I start getting into modern gaming that little bit more, maybe I'll change my mind and we'll have to revisit.